Up until today, it's been 10 days since the G20 summit. We didn't really see anything happen up until now. China said that they're going to, quote, buy a substantial amount of agricultural goods and products. Have we seen that happen yet? We haven't until today, and I'm going to leave you with that little cliffhanger so you guys will pay a little closer attention later as we get to the discussions about China. So of course, the first thing that we had and saw when President Trump stepped into office was the TPP agreement, now known as the CPTPP. We're not part of this anymore, but there are still many countries that are. This deal didn't just end with us pulling out. There are still countries negotiating and finalizing and wheeling and dealing to have access amongst themselves. A lot of them are Asian countries, but we're also seeing New Zealand in there, a couple of Latin American countries. They want trade, and we're not part of that anymore. We also know, of course, the USCMA agreement, the United States-Canada-Mexico agreement, or NAFTA 2.0, as I like to call it, the updated NAFTA agreement, has been signed by all the top 3 heads of each of those countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. At the G20 summit, we saw them sign that agreement on Friday morning, but we still aren't clear of that hurdle yet. We still have to see Congress vote on it. A few other pieces kind of need to be solidified. And honestly, it really wasn't that much of a win for agriculture. I hate to say it, because it was such a heartache there for a while, and it created a lot of instability and uncertainty in the markets, but the deal, for the most part, looks very much the same. Dairy got a few amendments and pros in their favor, as well as wheat, when you look at the grading process for wheat. Other than that, it pretty much looks the same for agriculture. However, I think it does show that we're creating market stability. We're continuing to trade with those partners. It was interesting, I was sitting here talking to Mark, and he said he was on the US, or the National Corn Growers, and went to Mexico, and he said that the Mexican producers were upset. We like trading with you, why did you do this? Why did you create this instability for us? But we continue to see that be the trend as we look at other trade agreements. The EU and Great Britain might be a bright spot in the future. You notice there I'm using a lot of maybes and could be's and will be's, because we still don't know what's going on there either. Great Britain is in the process of pulling out of the EU, Brexit as it's known in the news. And just yesterday they were supposed to have a vote within British Parliament to decide if the Prime Minister's plan to exit was the best idea for the country. Basically, the Prime Minister of Britain was going to present it at Parliament. Parliament, both chambers were going to vote yes or no, and she pulled the vote late Monday afternoon because she didn't think she could get the support that it needed. So what does that mean for U.S. agriculture and U.S. trade? Well, President Trump had earlier in the year said, let's trade with Great Britain. We can send them our beef. Great idea. Except now the EU is putting pressure on Great Britain to say, if you pull out of the EU, you won't be able to trade with countries like the United States. You still have to go through us for trade. You can't create your own free trade agreements with those folks. Okay, so let's trade with the EU. Great. We've had discussions with them, some early discussions about what a free trade agreement could look like, or what it looks like to put that conversation together. Unfortunately, the EU has said, we don't want ag to be part of the trade deal. That takes too much time. We don't want to mess with it right now. We're willing to negotiate things on auto, on manufacturing, on services, on goods. No ag. Let's leave that out of the picture. Okay, so that takes those 2 countries off the table. What about Japan? So earlier just this week, we saw quite a few farm groups, including the National Pork Producers Council, I think NCBA was there, and a couple other big commodity groups, presenting to the U.S. Trade Office saying the time is now to start working with Japan. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said he is now open to the idea of having a bilateral trade deal with the United States. Before he said, no, no, no. We only want things like TPP. We want multilateral, we want bilateral, trilateral, or no bilateral, just trilateral, multinational trade agreements. Now he at least has said, okay, let's open the discussion. So I think September, early October, we kind of officially decided to kick off having those talks and having those trade. But Monday of this week, those farm groups came to the White House, came to DC and said, we want this now. Japan is slashing tariffs for a lot of other trading partners and a lot of our other top competitors. Australia, New Zealand, they're getting their tariffs slashed so they can send beef to China. What about us? What about pork? Pork is a huge staple of a lot of Asian countries, including Japan's diets. We want our products in there as well. So they're placing a little more pressure here on DC to get some things rolling with Japan. Then of course we've got the the South Korean agreement, chorus. Not a lot to talk about there. It's over and done. Basically a signing and moved on. But it's good to see that we're having that strong trade relationships with some countries.